When you remove a celestial creator from the cosmos, you are immediately faced with a structural problem. How do you locate profound meaning in a universe that wasn't built for you? To understand Friedrich Nietzsche's answer to this, we will use the analytical framework developed by philosopher Brook Ziporyn. This diagram illustrates the current cultural impasse. When facing the void of meaning, modern thought typically splits into two primary paths. On the left is theism, advocating a return to traditional theological frameworks and an objective, creator-given purpose. On the right is new atheism, a worldview that rejects God, but often results in a spiritually sterile reductionism, leaving a void of meaning. But Ziporyn identifies a third path, mystical atheism. It dismisses the celestial creator, but also the premise that finite creatures inherently require a creator for ultimate purpose. This graphic demonstrates the core of emulative atheism. Instead of humanity seeking to uncover what is objectively good in a top-down hierarchy, humanity labels as good whatever it currently wills. The creative will itself acts as the sole value giver. The primary vehicle for this conceptual shift is Nietzsche's masterwork, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. If true meaning in a godless universe must be generated internally by the creative will, we have to examine how this will actually functions mechanically. This diagram outlines the architecture of compensatory atheism. In a universe lacking inherent meaning, humanity feels compelled to fabricate its own goals. The specific goal chosen is secondary. Humans would rather will something, anything, than nothing at all. This visual shows the fundamental axiom of the will to power. It operates as a tautology. The ultimate desire is not the object itself, but the desire to possess the efficacy to alter reality, to want your wanting to make what you want to happen, happen. This reveals an inherent contradiction in the will structure. If the true object of desire is the power to bring about a state, then actually attaining that goal is an ontological threat. The will must destroy what it creates so it can continue willing. This diagram introduces facticity. Facticity is the immovable, objective state of what it is or it was. Once an aspiration becomes an accomplished fact, the will can no longer act upon it. Consequently, whatever the will successfully creates eventually becomes a hated obstacle to further willing. This concept transcribes Spinoza's conatus, the innate striving of a thing to persevere in its being through a volatile lens where the will constantly seeks to overcome all states of being. This visual corrects a catastrophic misinterpretation of Nietzsche. On the left is the will to control, a fantasy of linear teleology and absolute unwavering purpose. On the right is the actual will to power, a Dionysian reality of crooked paths, chaos, and constant self-overcoming. This chaotic, localized creation process resembles the Schellingian artist. It creates purposively, but without a predefined macro-historical blueprint dictating the final outcome. The will is an aesthetic, self-overcoming drive. By design, it is doomed to frustration if it attempts to exert permanent control over static facts. Nietzsche operates as the diagnostician of this spiritual evolution, breaking down how human psychology responds to the paradox of the will. This table maps Nietzsche's three metaphorical stages, the camel, the lion, and the child, directly onto Ziporyn's typologies of atheism. The first stage is the camel, representing the theist. Here, the spirit kneels to bear heavy loads, accepting external values, pre-existing teleologies, and the absolute command of thou shalt. This represents the lion, the compensatory atheist. The spirit slays the dragon of thou shalt and destroys old idols to assert independent goals. But the lion has a critical limitation. It remains incapable of ultimate affirmation because its I will is trapped by time's irreversibility. This golden ring introduces the final stage, the child, or the emulative atheist. Representing a self-propelling wheel and the sacred yes, the individual emulates the universe's inherent purposelessness through pure play. To evolve past the lion's compensatory rebellion and become the child, a specific mechanical solution is required to defeat time itself.
This equation lays out the mathematical baseline logic of the eternal recurrence.
If the universe consists of finite physical forces operating over infinite time under mechanistic necessity, every combination must eventually recur an infinite number of times. This diagram shows how absolute exactitude acts as a philosophical problem-solving apparatus, reconciling ontological opposites. A fleeting contingent moment of becoming stands as firm as a static form of being, because it is destined to repeat infinitely. This chart explains the epistemology of eternity. For an experience to repeat exactly, it cannot contain the meta-knowledge that it is repeating. If it remembered, it would be a different moment. Therefore, living a moment exactly once is phenomenologically indistinguishable from living it infinitely. This table highlights the conflict between two major diagnoses of human suffering. Schopenhauer viewed life as perpetual suffering stemming from the will's timeless, restless striving. Nietzsche internalized this diagnosis, but argued that suffering stems precisely from the temporal structure of the will, not a timeless essence. Schopenhauer stands as the ultimate philosophical opponent in this specific diagnostic battle over the nature of human misery. This diagram reveals the core psychological crisis. The will can only operate in one direction. It is totally powerless with respect to what has been done. The immovable facticity of the past, the it was, is a permanent, mocking insult to the will's desire for limitless efficacy. This flowchart traces the historical consequence of that temporal frustration. The will slanders reality, claiming the world deserves its suffering. It invents concepts of moral guilt, judgment, and punishment to exact vengeance on a past it cannot control. This visual represents the grammatical illusion. Indo-European language structurally splits the continuous flow of the world into discrete subjects and predicates, a doer and a deed. This linguistic coercion falsely substantiates the concept of an ego or a god as a separate causal capacity. Human suffering and moral guilt are not divine truths. They are merely mechanical, psychological byproducts of the will being trapped moving forward in time. This network diagram illustrates humanity as fatum, or absolute fate. Every individual is inextricably linked to the whole universe from the front and the rear. To demand that one piece change is to demand that everything be changed, even retroactively. This diagram outlines willing backward. In a closed loop, causal arrows point both ways. By asserting, "thus I willed it," the will transforms the past into a self-authored creation. The alchemy is harsh. Desiring intense joy requires actively willing past traumas as necessary preconditions. This shows the dialectic of cursing and blessing. The spirit must act as the lion, wrestling and denying false values, before placing the azure bell of blessing over all things, freeing the world from a single rational purpose. This dichotomy contrasts Schopenhauer's ascetic retreat, an immaculate perception looking at life without grasping, against Nietzsche's omni-desire. Nietzsche demands a profound, thirsty embrace of reality, where misery is causally necessary to produce the joy itself. True philosophical liberation is not found by escaping reality, but through an absolute, terrifying, and retroactive embrace of its entire interconnected web. This scale illustrates the ultimate paradox solver. Under eternal recurrence, willing one thing requires willing all things as its precondition. This creates atheist beatitude. By encompassing reality, the will cannot selectively prefer. To will all is to will none, ending desire as suffering. This synthesis redefines the will as an aesthetic drive towards self-overcoming. The eternal recurrence acts as a psychological crucible, dissolving regret and shattering the guilty ego. This yields the ultimate epiphany, the innocence of becoming. Loving our fleeting moment becomes identical to loving eternity. Salvation in a godless universe is not granted from above. It is achieved exclusively through the unconditioned, joyous affirmation of purposelessness.